Hello and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. Trying to find new ways to say that, just like to keep it fresh. My name is Ryan Hamann. You may call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q. And H, I am so happy to have you back in the hosting chair this week. Let me tell you, doing it on my own felt really weird.
I mean, you weren't entirely on your own, but no, that would be a little weird to just have like a one-person podcast. I guess that's what Serial is, though, and they seem to be doing all right for themselves.
Yeah, we gotta cut one of us out and sort of the top of the charts here. So you were gone, and I understand we crossed paths. You were in California?
Yeah, I was down in beautiful Southern California, spent a few days in San Diego, and then I went up to a friend of mine who lives in Hollywood, spent a few more days there, and along the way, I think a day or two after you posted a picture in the same location, I went down to Disneyland because I grew up in Anaheim, California, and I love Disneyland more than pretty much anything in the world right now.
Really? You're luckily you got that Xbox One release of the Disneyland Park Adventure.
Yeah, that's right. I have been playing that recently, but the park is just so cool. There's just something about, and we've talked about it, I believe, on this podcast before, that is kind of like a pilgrimage site for a lot of game designers to go down to Disneyland because of the really intelligent ways that they kind of create virtual spaces from the imagination, the kind of like Westworld phenomenon where you enter a land and it is all themed in the same way. And then, you know, every cast member behaves like it's all real, and you just like become, you start to believe that the edifice that they're putting up is a reality. It's super cool, and I get really into that kind of thing.
Kind of had a very good example of what you mean by, I was in Cars Land. I was in California Adventure, which I learned is not Disneyland thanks to your tweeting at me. Yeah, I was in Cars Land, and we were waiting for our group to kind of coalesce so we could go on the Cars ride. And while waiting, sitting on a bench, this woman who looked like she was kind of pushing a set of boxes from one location to another, like a shipping container, kind of walks up, and behind her is this car who then announces itself as being a DJ car. And she unfurls the boxes, and they are like a platform to dance on. And then a bunch of people come out of the woodwork from seemingly nowhere. I could not tell where these people were emerging from. And a dance party broke out. And I said, oh my God, it is like living in a video game, right? Every part of your environment is crafted to control how you feel at any moment. It was wild.
That's true. And then with fast passes, you have waypoints. With the photo pass people, you've got quest givers. It's really interesting. So yeah, again, high recommendations from both of us. If you ever find yourself in the California area or the various other spots, I think Paris and Florida and Tokyo, check out one of the Disneyland parks. It's super cool. You'll learn a lot about game design. You won't think that you will, but you will.
Yes, it's excellent.
Anyways, let's get into pitching some brand new video game ideas. And I'm going to start us off with, this is a weird one.
I love it already.
When you wake up in the morning, sometimes you'll have had an idea in your sleep and you'll write it down, and then you look back later and you're like, what was I even thinking to think this was a good idea?
Yes.
So basically that's what I'm bringing today. This was something that I came up with either in a dream or in that like lucid state between being asleep and awake. And I really can't wrap my mind around right now whether it's a good idea or whether it's a terrible idea. But what I want to do is, I've always liked those games like Audio Surf and Beat Hazard, I think is one of them. Games that kind of correlate with music that you can supply. But what I want to do is, instead of something that kind of auto-detects the beats and the peaks and the troughs in music that comes from the player's computer, I want to do like a more curated, pre-designed experience of a shmup, a kind of overhead Ballet-Hell shoot 'em up that is synchronized with like a specific musical or opera or ballet or something, and it takes you through the entire thing. So you can have like Les Miserables and basically play through the entire game as a Ballet-Hell shoot 'em up. And, you know, for whatever that takes all these interesting bullet patterns kind of corresponding with the peaks and troughs in the music and the ways that goes. I think it could add something to the musical experience to be able to kind of see the music unfolding in this kind of synesthetic way in front of you, experientially with the gameplay, as well as just giving you exposure, a reason to sit through an entire musical or opera or something that you wouldn't otherwise. And then, of course, offering additional musicals as DLC, but with a focus on presenting the entire work. So I don't know if it's a good idea or if it's a terrible idea, but let's talk about it and let's see where we can take it. So I'm starting the clock.
Wow. Well, let's start under the assumption this is a good idea, because I think it is. I really like the idea of being able to coordinate, the sort of ultra violence, I guess, of a shoot 'em up with something like Swan Lake or something like the Nutcracker.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it would be a really great way to very abstractly tell the stories of some of these things just through the music, right? Because so much of musicals, the key plot points do happen during these music breaks. I could even imagine, there are aspects of it that you look at Beat Hazard and you see that it's kind of a lot of things spawning on screen and you kind of having to, it's just kind of flashing to the beat more than it is totally coordinated.
Yeah,
but if it was almost more like a Guitar Hero or Rock Band where it was authored to fit the musical, then I think you could do really exciting visuals along with it and really make the moments bring someone to tears the way that seeing it live might.
A lot of that, especially in ballet, is about kind of storytelling through dance.
Yeah.
And I guess for my money, other than the Dance Central Connect games and stuff, I think that Ballet-Hells are kind of the closest that you get within the video game space to really exploring dance, like a really kinetic way to tell a story just through movement and just through patterns. And, if you look at a stage of a ballet, with all of the moving actors, and sometimes they're really intricately kind of interweaving between one another, it can feel like that same kind of experience.
Yeah,
it can feel
like
a Ballet-Hell, so to speak. I don't know. I think it could work out. But one of the things that I was curious about is, I want to not only make people just sit through a musical, but I want them to get some sort of a meaning out of it. I don't want to make it themed on that specific musical because I want it to be abstract. I want them to get the emotion of the musical through the music and through the movement of the shapes, and not because, everything looks like revolutionary France in the Les Miserables level. I don't want it to be aesthetically themed like the musical would be. I want it to be very abstract.
Right, and a bunch of baguettes flying at you. Yeah, definitely
That's
don't
not
want
a bad idea. That could be a separate thing.
Second idea, TM.
I do want this to be kind of an edutainment kind of tool.
Yeah.
Some sort of like an educational experience that players can walk away from playing through this game and feel like they have some basic understanding of what the property was about, what the musical was about. And one of the challenges on that is understanding the words. A lot of operas are composed in other languages and stuff, and sometimes it's really hard to understand the words of what happens if someone's singing, and especially if you're focused on something else. So I want some clever way to display like subtitles or the lyrics or something without distracting from the very intense Ballet-Hell action. So I guess what would you recommend? What would be the best way to put the words on screen without distracting?
Well, I've got two solves potentially for this, which is number one, I think you could do something where the types of enemies or the types of entities spawning that you're destroying could be centralized to the character that is singing in the moment, right? So those enemies essentially can have properties of the character, whether they're, aggressive or big and boisterous or very kind of delicate and sweet. And to maybe have I was at BlizzCon recently and Muse was playing, and they had, as most bands do nowadays, as they play, a giant screen of nonsense flying behind them the whole time. But one of the things I really liked is in one of their songs where the chorus is something to the effect of like, they will not force us, and like key words were appearing on the screen behind them of like force and contain, all these things that they were saying in the music.
Yeah, interesting.
So I wonder if you could have it where like destroying some enemies like explode into words to the timing. Of course, you'd have to destroy things in time, or you'd have to wait for an explosion that matched that beat, but that could be very cool to coordinate, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that could be cool. And bigger enemies, like those screen-filling bosses that might have like a screen on them, if this is the traditional kind of like sci-fi futuristic type of overhead shmup.
Yeah, and even to call back to old like Mode 7 and like Super Nintendo stuff, if you did some levels were the top-down shmup and then some levels were the res like things coming forward at you and the perspective change. So, you could have potentially entire movements take place in one perspective or entire numbers take place in a certain perspective.
Yeah, speaking of res, this could work really well as like a VR experience as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think anything that tickles the senses is always way enhanced by doing it in VR.
Yeah. Alternatively, this could be a really cool game to have like in an arcade setup with the music of this kind of like traditional opera or ballet or something kind of blasting, like you would hear the attract mode on like an old Tekken cabinet or something.
Yeah, and of course it would be, songs people have heard throughout pop culture or whatever. I can also think, I know you don't want to necessarily lean into the theme of each individual play, but I think that there is something interesting to, have you seen Sweeney Todd?
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to have something that is kind of like razor blades and blood or pies, some things that are not exactly literally people's faces or, you're kind of roaming the streets in a more of a like weird top-down Smash TV sort of thing and more of a Geometry Wars style, everything is a glowing, cool, abstract representation.
Yeah, I want to kind of trigger this curiosity in the player rather than kind of bombard them with the iconography and everything, but having a few symbols throughout the level, just kind of like things strewn across the ground or a couple of nice little subtle touches in the enemy design or something could be appreciated.
And I like that each musical lends itself to level organization of a way, like an entire campaign or DLC pack could be one particular play. And using game mechanics, whether that's enemy spawns or just the obstacles you're dealing with, can essentially elicit that feeling of tension or emotion or excitement that maybe someone who didn't think they were interested in this musical might experience. And then, I think they go see it, right? And then they're like, wow, whether it's the musical itself making them feel this or it's their memory of the game making them feel a certain way, trying to connect that emotion, right?
Want them to go to the opera house and then walk out about halfway through like the end of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Like, I don't need to see the movie. I've lived it.
Exactly. I don't need to see it, Dottie. Yeah, and you know what? I know you kind of called it edutainment, but I do think that is a good way to think about it because to me it's exciting to, like, I learned a lot of terms or words or even certain pieces of history from things like movies and video games before I actually read about them or learned about them. So I think, this game could be doing that for, a piece of culture that not a lot of people have access to if you don't live outside of a city.
Yeah, exactly. You know how expensive theater is to go to. I love the theater myself, and it's just kind of like disappointing where it's like, oh, something's in town. Like I kind of want to see it, but it's like $60 to get like a back seat ticket. It's kind of not as accessible as movies and stuff are.
Right. How do you see trying to deal with, could you do something where like each act ends in a boss? Like, are there bosses in this in your mind? Or like, because I feel like most good shmups have the kind of like giant floating thing at some point. So it's like, does Jean Valjean show up as an abstract representation and he is, the boss?
Yeah, basically what I want to do is give them a cheat code almost to get to the experience of watching the musical as somebody who like really deeply understands musicals. And so the way to do that is to give them the same kind of emotional arc that somebody would have while they're watching this musical. And I mean, luckily, all musicals have like a traditional story arc already. And so you can just kind of like follow that. Like it's a nice little cheat there. But pretty much like whenever something needs to be heightened to that level, like you can throw in a big boss. But it would really kind of depend on where it is in Les Miserables or Hamilton or whatever it is that you're shooting through.
Right.
But anyways, that is all the time that we have for that. I'm going to give it a name, and I kind of like this name, and I feel like I might use it again in the future, but I'm going to call this Ballet-Hell. It works better on paper than it does speaking it out loud. But
well, I like the pitch because Ballet-Hell is going to sell to the audience that probably needs to go to the ballet. So...
Well, that is me speaking from a half-conscious self. And so let's see if you can bring us something a little bit more sensible.
Well, I was just going to say I'm worried because I feel like my idea is less complete and it was from a fully conscious self. So my pitch for you this week, H, is hopefully also bringing a little culture. You know I love Sims, especially city Sims. I've been inspired by both my girlfriend and the organization she works for called Kaboom. If anybody there is listening, shout out to them, to do a playground building simulator of sorts.
Oh, cool.
So, there are great tycoon games for building theme parks, and there are great city sims like City Skylines for building entire cities. But I always notice inevitably in a city simulator, there is that mechanic of, hey, your population needs to be happier. Just throw a park next to all their houses and somehow the neighborhood is, voila, magically better. But there is a lot to it, right? And I wanted to explore a game where you're sort of choosing a neighborhood and you start with kind of like a better off, maybe higher middle class neighborhood with plenty of resources and funding. And you're going through the neighborhood and there's different plots and you're setting up playgrounds for the families of those areas, and you get certain, materials and designs available to you, and as more people attend, your budget grows and you get more funding and all that stuff. And then as you kind of expand and beautify and make happy each neighborhood, you kind of go on and move on and tackle a tougher neighborhood which maybe has less ideal conditions, or there's more adversity that you have to deal with in terms of location, and you kind of work your way up the ladder until you're able to help out even the most troubled of the neighborhoods in building playgrounds for them. So there's probably a lot of mechanics we can talk about, but I'll end it there.
All right, well, let's go ahead and start the clock, see where we can take this. As you pitched this, I was thinking of multiple different directions that I could send this into. And that is, of course, my job here is to send things in a complete disarray, because
no, I love
if you come in with an idea and you leave with the same idea, then what are we even here for? So
that's true, yeah.
I'm going to try to break this in any way that I can. And the first way that I want to do that is when you compare this to a theme park simulator, that's one of the first things that came to my mind as well, is that, isn't a theme park just like a bigger playground, and what is gained by making it a playground other than just like limiting the scale and the kind of fabulousness that you're able to work with. You have slides instead of roller coasters. You have little those spinny carousel things instead of like
merry-go-rounds.
Actual horse carousels. Yeah.
Or no, it's not even a merry-go-round. It's the spin things. I know what you're talking about. Well, it's weird kind of being in a relationship with someone who works on a lot of this stuff, but there's a lot of kind of interesting technology that goes into playgrounds, especially with building materials. So I did like the idea of starting with the sort of wooden playground and upgrading to you get the futuristic playgrounds can have all sorts of stuff in them. They can have, LCD screens at some points, So I do think you can get into weird sci-fi-ish territory with these things.
Yeah, so one of the ways that I wanted to take this was maybe you are like an alien coming down from space and you are tasked with this job and you need to blend in with the humans and you have no idea what a playground is. And so you can build pretty much like out of like raw resources, like cutting into plastics to make shapes and just see what the children do to play on them. You can make slides and you can make whatever out of like, Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts level of customization and just kind of like stick things together and see what the kids do with it. But having an ignorance of the way that they're supposed to be is probably pretty difficult for people who are like the players themselves humans. So I don't really know how to impart that. Alternatively, the idea of treating a playground slide like a roller coaster in Roller Coaster Tycoon is, to me, very humorous. Like I would want to build a water slide that is like 7 stories tall and loops all over the park and
sends kids upside down,
ends and sends the children flying off into the patch next door. And
I think there's room for all that. In fact, I would even love to say you did have the kind of more, I hate to call it boring, but the more conservative sim version, and then you can do all this crazy stuff and make whatever size playground and a whole neighborhood size playground in sandbox mode and be able to do all that stuff. One of the things I think is interesting, say you're an alien, right? And we're going down this road for a second, that safety is a real thing for playgrounds, right? So the idea of an alien building something and people just like don't like it because kids fall off of it or, they slide down, but the slide, makes them go too fast and they're, going crazy. And it's a nice way, I think, of like in a theme park, when a roller coaster goes awry, your passengers are dead in fiction, right? Whereas like in a playground at worst, you're dealing with an angry parent and, a crying child, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another direction on the alien angle. What if you're building playgrounds, your kind of tutorial areas are on the Earth, but then you are tasked with going to different planets and building playgrounds for the children up there? And the different planets can have all sorts of different, like maybe it's a different dominant species that has tentacles instead of legs, and so it doesn't like certain things as much as other things. So you have to get creative with your resources and put things in a way that, like, jungle gyms might not be that much fun for an alien race that is just kind of like a sphere that rolls around on the ground and stuff like that. And then also the different planets would have like lower levels of gravity or higher levels of inertia, or
so there's a physics aspect to the whole thing.
Yeah. But the physics are different for each planet that you're put on.
You know what's cool about that too is now we're into kind of like Playground 2028, right? Or whatever which TM, good name for this thing. So let's pocket that for a second. But yeah, what I think is interesting about that is if you did do the Galactic Playground Builder, then now you can move into a space where building playgrounds that are a certain level of successful on these different worlds could unlock for you very weird and exotic technologies of like something that is like a boring bench for the roly ball species is actually a really fun toy for the humans, right? They're like, oh, I can get into this thing and kind of float all around. It's weird and wild. Something for species that are on a very low gravity planet maybe is very hard for that species to manipulate. It's like a structure for support, whereas on a high gravity planet, it's almost like a bouncy castle for them.
Mm-hmm. Maybe, and this might be too grim, so you can cut me off if that's the case, but what if this alien race just wants to eat children? And their idea is to create playgrounds all across the universe to attract kids so that they can like gather them up for like supper time?
I think we just lost the Kaboom endorsement with that one, but I am not entirely against it. I mean, like, or at minimum, right? Like the I guess a nice play on that would be an emperor that wants to, make kids happy all over the galaxy because like his kids are gone or something like that. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
That's a
nice
but a
way to put
monster
it.
who is hungry for children is very fun, and I feel like feels like it's in theme of like an 80s movie sci-fi villain or something.
Yeah,
like
one of
no,
those Simpsons like Treehouse of Terror episodes or something.
exactly. Yeah, a ghoulie to be sure.
Yeah, and so maybe throughout the game you're trying to like create playgrounds that are fun enough to where you can plant little portals back to the alien world and satisfy this giant Galactus that chases around the Silver Surfer and eats planets and stuff. You're trying to feed this kind of like giant galactic entity, but ultimately your goal is to find some way to use your like playground skills to eventually outsmart him using slides and carousels and stuff.
Yeah, and you know what? Speaking of those portals, if you are setting up these things that people can move between one type of playground and another, like it's a little vindictive, but I could see the human kids showing up and just having their way with the bouncy ball species. Just using them.
What do you mean by that?
I guess I mean, they're using them to play weird space volleyball.
Sure.
And a bit totally G-rated. Well, come on, this is a G-rated game.
Okay,
we gotta
cool.
do that.
We're cool. Some sort of an aspect of the spore-like influence where there's these kind of randomly generated species of different kind of aliens, and the game system kind of figures out how all of their arms and legs and stuff work. And you have to find out like, oh, what would be fun for something like this to do? Would it be able to do the monkey bars? I don't know.
Or this is episode 23. So it is about time for us to finally reference the spore creature creator. And just let us make crazy species with 20 limbs that are just supposed to navigate these playgrounds. And maybe you only get like very standard type of playground equipment, but you have to design a species that kind of fits and works with them.
And then kind of the end game is that you get this great kind of civilization that models all of their like adult architecture off of playground materials and stuff. And you're like, oh, you made a grand difference in this kingdom.
Oh, I like that. And it maybe as the years go by or whatever, you see the city that's kind of the skyline in the background slowly transforming to look more and more like the things that influence the kids, right?
Yeah, monkey bars and stuff. I like that. But anyways, that's all the time we have for that. Let's give that one a name.
Well, I'm tempted to go back to Playground 2028. Maybe we'd go more future-y. Maybe we say like 2828, something really out there.
All right, sure. A number's a number, because 2028 is going to be here like almost immediately.
We'll be alive for that. I don't want to see this horrible future where kids...
It's weird when we get to those years where sci-fi things happen.
Oh, yeah.
Like 1984 was a long time ago. Terminator 2 took place a long time ago. We are currently in the year of Earth Defense Force 2017.
Well, and this is when we have to finally reveal to the listeners that we have been Skynet the whole time.
Yep, that's true. And of course, my favorite sci-fi dystopian future in Madden 2018. It's just going to be unbelievable to see what the world's going to be like when we get there. It's just another year until we find out.
A blood
everyone's
bowl.
going to have, everyone's going to have football helmets and run on these strange green stretches of land.
Yes, they're going to call it AstroTurf. It's going to be wild.
Exchanging points and violently assaulting one another. It's a future that I don't want to live in myself.
It's funny. We call that sci-fi, but I do think if you could go back in time and get Ben Franklin and show him a football stadium filled with 60,000 people, he'd be like, what is this? What is happening?
He'd just be distracted by the cheerleaders. I've known enough stories about Benjamin Franklin.
All right, that's fair, yeah.
Let us get into a pitch from one of our listeners. This comes from the community. If you, the listener, would like to pitch something to us, then you can do that at playwrightcast.com. That is playwritecast.com. Or you can email us, playwrightcast@gmail.com. And we will read your idea on the air. We will discuss it, dissect it, take it in entirely different directions, and eventually come up with a game that you could theoretically pitch to a publisher at some point in your life, or no guarantees it's going to be any good, but guarantee that it's going to be interesting.
Yes, agreed.
This one comes from Lance Barger, who we've heard from before, who says, "Hey guys, still really enjoying the show. Thanks for all the work you put into it." Thank you, Lance. We appreciate the listeners.
We do. And by the way, this is where I interject and say, Lance,
Please
if you
do.
love us, go ahead and head over to Apple Podcasts. Leave us one of them 5-star reviews. We feed off of it like children in Gorgon.
Like a slide full of children pouring into our mouths.
Oh my God. All right,
boy.
pitch it.
All right. I've got another pitch for you. This one might be an edutainment type of game, but it doesn't mean it has to be boring. My daughter and I have been sick this past week, and it got me thinking about bacterial infections and how menacing they look close up under a microscope. So how about a shmup? I like this. We got this edutainment shmup thing going on.
Edutainment shmups. Okay. All right.
I swear I didn't read this before the show.
No, it's true.
Where your ship goes into the human body and blasts the infectious enemy to clear the system. Now I know what you're thinking. That's just a standard shmup with a kind of gross backdrop. So I think we need to jazz it up a bit. You know how shmups will often have a bomb power-up that wipes out whole screens when you get overwhelmed? In this game, it's an antibiotic. And what happens when you use an antibiotic against the same strand of bacteria too much, the infection evolves and becomes resistant. This opens up the gameplay for 2 different paths the player can choose. The homeopathic run, where they try to complete the game without using antibiotics, and the fully evolved run, where they keep spamming antibiotics until the infection is at its most powerful. There could also be a currency system involved where money earned during the game can get into an R&D to make more powerful weapons suited to fight off the evolving infections. I hope this gives you guys enough for a lively discussion. Sent from my iPhone.
Well,
I just like to think that's an intentional part of every email that we receive.
That someone took the time to say, sent from my iPhone.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
and by
so
the way,
proud of it.
Disinfect the iPhone, Lance, because it's disgusting.
Wait, what?
He's sick and he's just typing with his gross hands all over.
I
this
know
iPhone.
that you're such a huge Apple fanboy, and it surprised me to hear that kind of anti-Apple speak come from you.
Using the right device. Just please wash it and care for it. What do you think of this? You were the today's shmup edutainment person, so you start.
This got a lot more interesting as you got into the antibiotic thing, and that's the way it was explained to me back in school was that, when the antibiotic, like hand wash and stuff, the Purell type stuff says kills 99.9% of bacteria or germs or whatever. And you think, oh, great. Well, that's pretty much all of it. Then I'll be like pretty much entirely clean. I can just bathe myself in this every day and just be some sort of like immortal being going through life without ever getting sick. But it's not like a randomized lottery of 99.9%. It is like we can kill 99.9%, but every 0.1% is going to be like some badass strain that we can't kill. And since we're killing everything else, all that's left to breed is just the badass strains. And so before long, we're going to cultivate this system of all badass bacteria. And so it's interesting that this could be maneuvered into kind of like a game mechanic. If you think about something like Geometry Wars, you have all these different shapes that follow you around this board, and you can twin stick shooter, just kind of shoot at all of them, and your objective is to clear the board of all of your pursuers and stuff, and then you get the bomb that can clear the battlefield. But what if the bomb is effective against everything except for the very strongest strains, and you can't tell what the strongest ones are by looking at them? They can take more bullets, they're bullet spongy, they can withstand more abuse, but they all look the same as all the others. And so you can choose to let loose your bombs, like Lance was describing, but that creates more, a higher proportion of these stronger strains versus if you were to just, use your kind of middling little guns along the way. It's a way of kind of making the bombs a core mechanic instead of being almost like a
get out of jail
like you're almost,
free.
yeah, like you're discouraged to use it in a regular type of game. This can be like the difficulty slider, so to speak.
Well, Lance, I don't know if you've listened to every episode of this show or not, but he's finally a listener has pitched Inner Space, like I have been talking about now since episode 1. I love the idea of a game where, especially if I do get my full inner space, like, two brave people shrink down into a tiny little pod that shoots antibiotics and stuff, and they're fighting germs and bacteria. And I do even love, oh man, I've referenced Spore twice now on this episode, but you know how Spore, as you kind of evolve, you like move up a layer in the primordial ooze. I think that'd be really cool to like go in via like the foot or whatever, or the mouth, and work your way down or up the body and get to the different areas.
Yeah.
And you could have like story beats and stuff around that. This is interesting because it is a real thing, right? Like, I wonder if there is kind of a story that you can wrap this up in if you do discover that the person has some sort of disease, or if you're like actually going, because I mean, there's only so many antibiotics that one person can take. Maybe you're jumping from person to person and, you get to very, quote, infected people by the run that have maybe been bombed with antibiotics several times before, and therefore you're in a like more difficult body you've jumped to.
I don't know why this comes to my mind, but I really want live action story videos in between levels, kind of like an old Sega CD game.
Oh yeah.
Or like the recent Roundabout game on you can get on Steam now. I think this would be like really fun and wacky to have this kind of like hammy, kind of cheesy FMV sequences.
You know what? And we have this is the pitch, right? In between, you have Lance, right? FMV of Lance picking up his daughter. She sneezes right on his face, and then
right on his iPhone.
right on his iPhone, and then he puts it up to his face, and then all of a sudden we zoom into the microscope level, and the level begins.
Yeah, that could be good. You could play this kind of like defense force for this body and like an Osmosis Jones type setup.
What is kind of cool about thinking about it on the Osmosis Jones beat, you don't necessarily have to spend your whole time in a body, right? Like people use disinfecting wipes on stove surfaces and sinks and, bathtubs and toilets, that you could do a whole series of levels and actually in like a weird Pikmin-esque sort of way, like super zoom into all these surfaces and almost celebrate how germy and dirty the whole world is.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
We need germs, right? So like in a weird way, you're the bad guy of this thing.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's everything in moderation, I suppose. But yeah, you can have these different weapons you can switch between, kind of like the Super Stardust games that were out on PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4.
Oh, yeah.
Where you can switch between weapon types there. Basically all coming down to this trade-off that you're making between exterminating all of the weaker forms all at once so that you won't get surrounded by enemies versus selectively breeding this stronger strain of enemies. And maybe if you spam bombs, then you can trigger these like super boss fights or something where you get into, not secret necessarily, because this is a pretty simple method to get there, but you can trigger more intense fights against like very highly decorated enemies.
You know what would be cool too is he's going for the edutainment angle. So I do like, as you defeat enough of an enemy or something, you're adding to your log book and learning, like, literally one of the types of bacteria can be influenza, right? And like, so I've defeated enough influenza. I'm learning more and more about what, the flu actually is and does. And you can get in there and get your tetanus and all the greatest hits of weird diseases that humans can be infected with. Rabies got to make an appearance.
Get the Black Plague and stuff like that. I hope it wouldn't be disrespectful to anyone going through it, but maybe like as you're going through all of these different diseases and stuff, then your power base could be based on the different types of treatments and what they actually do to the different bacteria and germs and stuff, and maybe kind of like a final boss. And again, cross my fingers, this is not disrespectful, but it could be cancer. And so you're using like lasers and something to simulate the chemo treatment and stuff to, again, battle this very daunting foe.
Well, I think, a lot of these things, and I was thinking something like cancer too, but, obviously it's a lot about how you handle that in the game and how much you lean into the education of it or telling a story that it's meaningful because, I had a grandfather that had cancer, and one thing that anybody that has this disease will tell you is they don't stop being themselves. They still have senses of humor. They still like to have fun. They still want to enjoy their life. And so, that could be some way to provide levity for somebody that's dealing with that disease of like, hey, feel empowered during your chemo treatment, pick up your Switch and literally blast cancer away.
That's true. Yeah.
But, it's the matter of tact. But cancer is an interesting disease because like anybody that knows a little bit about it can tell you is it kind of, you can get rid of it in one place and it crops up in another. So that could be maybe the reoccurring boss throughout the whole thing. And, that eventually you're trying to fully eradicate it. Hopefully it has a happy ending, right?
Or the mechanics there could be, you're trying to manage this game board, so to speak, like in the Geometry Wars level. But as you're defeating it in one place, you have to make sure that you get every little bit of it. Otherwise, it'll come back pretty quickly somewhere else. And just managing this space.
Yeah, it's like maybe it's a level that's auto-scrolling or something like that. And you're really incentivized to really wipe out every bit of it, or else, it's not the correct thing for the patient.
Yeah.
And then you could even introduce, because like chemotherapy, people can tell you that wipes out good germs and cells as well. So maybe when you're battling cancer, there's kind of like the innocent cells that you have to not shoot.
Yeah, throughout all of the other levels, you have these kind of like helper cells that are you can collect and can like shoot alongside of you. I think there's some like, I don't remember if Galaga or some of the other like older shmups had helper pods that you could collect. And maybe in those levels where you have to employ those more extreme treatments, it also like actively hurts the ones that you've come to rely on up to this point.
Yeah, and I can imagine levels where, a shmup can still have levels where you're kind of navigating tighter corridors and you're trying not to, either bump into a wall, or you're trying to make sure that you don't shoot particularly sensitive areas of tissue or something, where you're kind of avoiding parts of the environment at the same time as dealing with the bad cells that are very interested in attacking you, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, anyways, we have to end the discussion there and give it a name, a diagnosis, so to speak. Now, Lance does not come to us with any name, so we're going to have to come up with something ourselves.
Well, we could call it Barger syndrome and name the disease after the person who pitched it.
Yeah, okay. Let's call it for that for now. And if you have any ideas of where to take this or any of our previous pitches, if you have better names than we were able to come up with, we would encourage you to get in touch with us. We are PlaywrightCast on social media, on Twitter, on email. You can email us playwrightcast@gmail.com. You can post on our website. And we have comment sections for each of our episodes. If you have anything to say about any of those, we'd love to read it. Please do submit your own ideas. We are running a little low at the moment. It kind of goes up and down with time, but we'll put out another call on social media. But why don't you beat the rush? If you hear it first and get your idea in quickly, then it'll be that much sooner that we get to it on the show.
You can submit right from the homepage, and once you're done doing that, you can head over to Bandcamp and pick up the track Hello World. It's our theme song by PROTODOME off the album Blue Noise. It's really good. You should check it out.
Right. All excellent. Anyways, to take us out today, I want to drop a mini idea, and this is not a fully fleshed out idea. This is one that I want the community's involvement with. So what I'm going to give you is a name, and I just want to hear like what what kind of game would you turn this into? And hopefully over the next week, we can kind of get a good sense of all sorts of different ideas on this. Maybe we'll read some of our favorites next time. We'll see. Anyways, the name of this game, hearkening back to the well-trodden expression that is repeated all too often in American culture, is Thoughts and Prayers.
Ooh. All right. We'll see you next time, huh?
See you later.
Bye.